Well, good afternoon, everybody. And I hope everybody had a good break and welcome back to the Divine Nine Legends Day afternoon sessions. My name is Randall Eaton. I'm the 6th District Voter Registration Chair for Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated for the states of North Carolina and South Carolina. Joining me today, also my peers, Carol Goins of Delta Sigma Theta and Simone Langley of AKA. So thank them for participating or assisting in the moderation today. So over the last 6 years, we have included policing as a priority of our conversations with legislators. We also include the Divine Nine and most recently, the community as a whole. Just last year, we centered the conversation around criminal justice, where we had North Carolina Supreme Court justices, North Carolina lawyers, and North Carolina police chiefs to educate us on how the criminal justice systems affect the people of color. This year, we are honored to have panelists from the North Carolina Office of Sheriffs to discuss the power of the sheriff in our North Carolina communities. North Carolina has 20 African-American sheriffs across the state, 19 men and 1 female. Today, we are fortunate enough to have the first and only African-American female sheriff, Sheriff Paula Dance of Pitt County. Welcome. We also have Sheriff James Clemens of Richmond County, who's my fraternity brother of Omega Psi Phi, and Sheriff Quentin Miller of Buncombe County on the panel. So welcome, sheriffs. So with that said, we're gonna move right into our town hall discussion today. We're gonna have some topics that we will discuss, and then at the end, we will open up for questions and answers, but feel free as we're going along to put your questions in the chat, and we'll be monitoring those and make sure we'll do all we can to get those answered as we move along. If you all actually attended our morning session, you saw where we just want to make sure that the community knows that the Divine Nine is a nonpartisan organization. So we are not in particular supporting or agreeing or disagreeing with any of the things that we may discuss today, but we just wanted to make sure that we educate the public as much as we can. So thank you again for joining us. So now we're going to start off with introductions. So Sheriff Dance, if you will start, just give us some information about yourself and your demographics and where you are located and anything you'd like to share with us, and then we'll move into the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you all, first of all, for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here and exciting to be a part of this panel. I am Sheriff Paula Dance, and as mentioned, I am the first African-American female sheriff in the state of North Carolina. During my election in 2018, I was about the 5th sheriff ever elected, African-American female sheriff ever elected in the United States in 2021. But anyway, I have a 30-year career span with the sheriff's office in law enforcement. Worked my way up through the ranks from a lowly slick sleeve deputy answering calls to becoming a sergeant to major crimes investigators to lieutenant to captain to major, and here today I sit as sheriff. Very exciting times, and I hope that my journey and my story will be the guidepost for others who come behind me, especially in this profession, to think about joining this type of profession and knowing that there is a pathway to breaking glass ceilings. So thank you again for having me, and I look forward to communicating with you all in this discussion.
Thank you. Sheriff Clemens?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sheriff Clemens, Sheriff of Richmond County. I am a 42-year veteran in law enforcement. I'm in my current 3rd term as Sheriff of Richmond County. And throughout the years, I've had the pleasure of being on several boards within the state and also within this nation. My last duty assignment was President and Vice Chair of the North Carolina Sheriff's Association from 2018 through 20, and then 2018 through 19, and then 19 through 20. Also, I was selected to be a commissioner on the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administrative Justice, and I'm also a member of the North Carolina Governor's Task Force for Racial Equity and Criminal Justice, and also a member of the Juvenile Justice Planning Committee for Governor Cooper. And also I sit as a commissioner on the North Carolina Sentencing Commission. And I've had the opportunity of meeting folks nationwide, statewide, and just very proud to be in this profession. And also even prouder to be in a position where, along with my colleagues, we can tell the story of the history of sheriff and our office, and have an opportunity to have the community to understand what it is that we do to get rid of the myths and the preconceptions of what it is in the office of sheriff. Thank you.
Sheriff Miller.
Good afternoon. My name is Quentin Miller. I'm the sheriff here in Buncombe County. And I too am the first African-American here to be the sheriff in Buncombe County. I have over 38 years of law enforcement experience. And for me, I would just say that my wife and I, we have fostered over 100 kids. And the reason I bring that up is it is truly about the community for me and how we can better our community. In doing so, I talk about the community of we, and I'll talk more about that later on, is how this is no longer just the sheriff's office. It's not my office, it's the people's office. And we have to move forward, and we need help in making the office better. And how do we do that? We do that collectively together. And so I'll talk more about that later. And again, thank you for having me. And I'm just so proud of the opportunity to be before you today. And I'm excited about this opportunity.
Thank you, Sheriff Miller. Thank all of you. And Sheriff, I apologize for putting that G in Buncombe County. Okay, one of the things that our brother Sheriff Clemens brought up that actually leads right into our first topic. We think we know what the sheriff does in each county, but sometimes we find out that we really don't know what you all do and what you're responsible for. So let's get started by talking about the duties and responsibilities of the office of the sheriff. And each of you can actually speak to that.
Sister Dance, we will yield the floor to our sister first.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we can't be doing this ladies first all the time, but I'll take this one. So yes, the sheriff, the office of the sheriff has many, many responsibilities. If we're responsible for enforcing the law, of course, is number one, and going out and answering calls in the rural areas, but we have jurisdiction all over the county. So for instance, here, my county is 652 square miles, the 14th largest county in the state. And so we're responsible for those calls that are out in the rural areas. Of course, we have municipal police departments here that generally will answer the calls inside the city limits and those kinds of things. But everything else is what the sheriff does. We're responsible for the security and safety of the courtrooms when the courts are in session. We're responsible solely for knowing where every registered sex offender in our county is at, where they live, where they reside. We're responsible for the service of all civil papers, and we're talking DVPOs or money owed or divorce papers, those kinds of things. We are solely responsible for our biggest liability, which is the detention center, and making sure that we are meeting the needs of those who find themselves incarcerated in our detention center, as well as to protect the public from those who've been charged with crimes. We are solely responsible for the issuance of CCWs, which are your concealed carry permits, and the purchase permits. And so there's a lot of responsibility as we talk about what the sheriff has versus municipal entities. For instance, Greenville PD is the largest municipal agency here. Of course, they cannot come outside of their jurisdiction to investigate or to make arrests or all those kinds of things. Whereas the sheriff has the jurisdiction to go within the city limits of each municipality. In essence, we are the highest law enforcement official in our counties.
Thank you. Sheriff Miller, she mentioned the detention center. Can you elaborate on the responsibility of the sheriff for the detention center?
Yes. Let me also say that I will just tell you that I'm sure that all the sheriffs will agree with me that we look at our inmates, as some call them, as clients, that most of us are holding people pre-trial, which means they haven't been convicted of anything. And so that becomes very important to us to understand, and not only law enforcement, but for the community to understand that we are holding folks, not that we have any control over that. This is about the courts. The courts will even put them in pre-trial. We have no say of who's in pre-trial. If they say they're going to release them, we have no say. We're basically what I would call the gatekeeper, right? So that's important for people to understand that the sheriffs are not responsible for who's there. We're responsible for their care while they're there. We provide medical treatment for them, dental, health, whatever that is. It's just like we're their parents, if you will, while they're in our custody. And so we look at, that's why I look at them as not as inmates, but as clients, because we have a different responsibility. We're not there to try them, or we're not the people who give them or sentence them. So again, detention centers are just that, detention. And remember that this is just for pre-trial. And so a lot of people have to understand that pre-trial means just that they have not been convicted. If they are convicted, they're then sent off to our state prisons. So they're not there in our jails. So it's just important that we understand that, one, sheriffs have no control over who comes and when they leave, but we are responsible for their care while they're there. And secondly, we have to take this as a responsibility for their well-being, and that we're not the judge and jury while they're in our custody.
Thank you. Sheriff Clemens, you and I had some conversation about the difference or the separation between like the local police department and then the sheriff's department. And Sheriff Dance hit a little bit on that. Can you give us a little bit more information about the separation?
Well, as she stated earlier, we are identified as the chief law enforcement officers in the county. However, the municipalities do not work for us. Where you might have counties that have multiple police agencies, they have town councils or city councils that are responsible for their particular jurisdiction. As Sheriff Dance stated, they have a territorial jurisdiction, which is the city limits. In order to come outside of the city limits to effect an arrest, number one, the crime would have to be committed in front of them, and they will be in constant pursuit going through or outside of the county, or we as sheriffs will call in and ask for their assistance as though they will call for us assistance too. However, we have a county-wide jurisdiction. We can go in any community and deal with any issues of the law. Now, one thing that was stated earlier, one of the myths are that has always permeated in the state of North Carolina, that sheriff's deputies do not have the authority to enforce the law. They thought that that's all we did was work in the jails, work in our courtrooms, and do transportation. They forgot about the fact that crimes are committed within our jurisdictions, that we have that responsibility to investigate the crimes, and we also have the opportunities to investigate or enforce traffic, which means we can write tickets. I've had people over the years, when we would stop them for enforcement purposes, they would state that I didn't know that deputy sheriffs could stop us. The one issue that is different in the sheriff's office and in the police agency is that the sheriff is the one solely responsible to hire, fire, or supervise. The city chiefs have a different format that they have to go through in order to relieve an officer of duty or to even fire an officer. In the sheriff's office, if we have an officer that is rogue, if we have an officer that is unbecoming of that badge and that duty as a deputy sheriff, All we merely have to tell that individual is, and these were the exact words, your services are no longer needed. I don't have to go through a board. I don't have to go through any other organization to get rid of a bad law enforcement officers. But the chiefs of police have their hands tied. They have to go through the disciplinary process. They have to go through unions. They have to go through arbitration and all of these issues to be able to get rid of a bad officer. The sheriff has total autonomy to get rid of that individual and make sure that that individual does not work anywhere else, not only in the state of North Carolina, but anywhere else in our nation, because we have the opportunity to submit that information as to why they have been relieved of duty, and also answer the questionnaire. Would you hire this individual, or was this individual under investigation? Things of this nature that we can submit to make sure. So there is a big difference in the authority of the police chief and the authority of the sheriff. And I think that for us as sheriffs, we have that advantage that when we have a scenario that we have to deal with, that we don't have to go through red tape to relieve that individual of that job and to protect and serve the community in which we were elected to do. The other thing about our sheriffs is this: every sheriff is unique in his or her own county. There is not a set guideline or set rule that each sheriff goes by. It's based upon your county, the makeup of your county, understanding what the concerns of your county are, and also, too, more importantly, is taking control of that oath of office and what you told the citizens that you were going to do to help protect and preserve them as your sheriff of the county.
Thank you, Sheriff Clemens. I always refer to the sheriff, whether it's right or wrong, as the most powerful person in any given county, because your boss are the voters. So unless you go rogue, as you talked about, some officers do,
Yes, sir.
You're in there until your bosses, who are the voters, decide something else. As you mentioned, police chiefs, the city council or the city manager can decide what they want to do in the drop of a hat. But that's a little bit different. Also in the sheriff's department. So thank you all for that first part. And Sister Goins, if you will.
Thank you. And thank you to the sheriffs, and welcome to the all the folks who are out there listening. If the three of you could tell us what your vision of community policing is. And we'll start with my hometown sheriff, Sheriff Miller.
Thank you for that. So just right to the point, the vision for community policing begins with this for me: changing of the mindset. And you may ask what that is. So for me, changing the mindset means we have to move from being that of a mindset of being a warrior to that of being guardians, from getting away from us occupying our communities to being a part of our communities, from getting away from us versus them to that community of we that I spoke about earlier. So it begins by changing the mindset within law enforcement. And I know through our nation, we see all these different things happening. The first thing we come up with is we need more training. Well, I submit to you, we need to look at the heart of the individuals that we're dealing with, because I have over 400 employees, right? And I will tell you that they all get the same training. But if one of them happen to go rogue and get himself or oneself involved with something, it's not about training. A lot of times it's about the heart, about what the intent was inside. And so for me, a lot of this now, when we start saying, what are we going to do in our community needs to hold us accountable. We need to hold ourselves accountable. We also need to hold our community accountable. Again, I said, we're all in this together. So community policing for me, it talks about how do we make our community better, not just our law enforcement. And I think that's the myth and misconception for me is it's no longer just up to law enforcement to make a difference in our community. It's up to us as a community. Some of our things that we're trying to do now is the neighborhood police, we call them neighborhood resource officers. Some call them community resource officers. But we have to get out and be a part of our community. And that's part of the plan here, is to be a part of our community, listen to our community, and then let them be a part of what happens. And for that, I was just end with this. So here at Buncombe County, we have what we call an advisory board. And so what they do is they help us participate in our hiring process, our promotion process, as well as discipline matters. And what I mean by that is these are all civilians, all people from our community that comes forward and they volunteer their time to help us recruit, promote, and sometimes discipline, our folks. And so I'm excited about, again, I just like to make one correction for Mr. Eaton. It's not a sheriff's department, it's a sheriff's office,
Yeah.
right? And if sheriffs are sitting there, they waiting to say the same thing, that it's a sheriff's office. And
Sheriff
what that
Dance has corrected on me that before.
Oh, okay. And the reason for that is just what you said, that the people have placed us in these positions. And that's what makes it an office. Our boss is the people, where a police chief, his boss is maybe the city manager or someone of that nature. So that's just some more knowledge for our community that this is a sheriff's office. So thank you.
Thank you, Sheriff Miller. Sheriff Dance.
Mr. Eaton, you're gonna have to put $1 in the jar every time you say Sheriff's Department, okay?
I'll have to go back to work.
We're gonna need that dollar. So for me, community policing is establishing a culture of transparency, accountability, inclusiveness. Even here, when you think about when I hire folks, it is important to me that I hire people from within the community who have built those bonds and relationships already within the community that they live and grew up in. So when I hire these people, guess who comes along with them? That community who knows this person and trusts this person, who then comes with them in the sense of being more a part of the community and trusting the relationship with that officer, who then, of course, they began to see other law enforcement officers and build that trust with them. And I always say that the road to redemption between law enforcement and our community is a two-way street. And we have to meet in the middle. We, it can't just be police and it just can't be the community. We have to meet in the middle. And how do we do that? Of course, by communication. Communication is the strongest tool that we have in being inclusive of our community, going out and talking to people, building those relationships, not just enforcement. The only time that we speak with our community is when we're doing something that is seen as enforcement. We need to be having those conversations when there's no enforcement action to be taken. And so, again, it's just about transparency, accountability, and creating that culture of inclusiveness. We have citizens academies that the citizens come in and they learn what it is that we do, from why we stop, what the expectation is when you're stopped, how we investigate these calls and those kinds of things. So, and I think that goes a long way for us when people see what it is we do and understand and explain to them why we do what we do.
Thank you, Sheriff Dance. Sheriff Clemens.
They pretty much summed up what community policing is all about. However, I know that us three on this panel today can tell you that we would have had to go into our agencies early on and change the culture. We can tell you today, not only do you have the first African-American female sheriff in the state of North Carolina, you have two other African-Americans who were the first in their counties also. So all of us on this panel today are first. And the one thing you have to do before you can even get out in the community is you're going to have to change the culture of your agency. And as Sheriff Miller stated earlier, making sure that we're not perceived as the warrior, making sure that it's no longer us against them, but it's us together working to make a difference in our communities. we are all doing programs in our communities. Here in Richmond County, this sheriff's office is involved in pretty much everything that happens in our community, from Relay to Life, Special Olympics, dealing with the schools. We have a core of officers that are mentors in our local schools. We have a reading program where we go out to one of the elementary schools and we read to the kids to help them improve on their reading skills. We participate in our athletics here in the county, where on a Friday night in any given month, we as a sheriff's office will go out and feed our athletes before they go off out of town to play games. We have, like I said, our mentoring program, where we go to the local schools and we put officers in the schools to assist our young kids in understanding what we do and understanding what is happening in their community. Community policing has always been the backbone of law enforcement. This is not a process that's new. This is a process that's been practiced over the years. It's just, however, the light has not been shined on that, and we're calling it different things other than community policing. But bringing trust back to this profession and this badge that has been tarnished so badly for individuals that have made these horrific events happening in our communities. That's what makes the difference. But let it be known that the great officers that are out there that are protecting and serving every day, they're the ones that very ever hear the word thank you. They're the ones that when you're in the grocery store and they're talking to a kid and you'll hear the parents in the background, be good, or he's going to be the one that comes and gets you. Well, that's starting a culture. So we have to work together to make sure that folks understand that we who wear the badge are the guardians of justice, and not all of us are bad. They spoke to you earlier about hiring those from the community that represent our communities to come in this. Let's not be naive. The individuals in our community have biases. They have things that happen in their background. And the one thing that was said today that is extremely important that you need to understand, anytime an individual sits in front of us as an individual or sits in front of us as groups looking at this individual where he or she needs to be hired, the one thing that none of us can determine is what's in that person's heart. They're going to tell us everything that they think we want to hear about. I want to protect and serve. I want to be out there and help the people. That is the basic conversation that you hear in any line of work where they're telling you what they want you to know. We as sheriffs, we as chiefs of police do not know really what we get until we give them a gun, a badge, and a car. And remember what I said earlier, when the sheriff makes that decision to hire, he or she also has that opportunity to fire if that person is not what is needed for the community, that they do not represent this organization, and they not represent this community. So what we're looking forward to as far as community policing is collaborating with our community, making sure that it's us working together, using the words we instead of them, instead of I. And as long as we can move that forward, we can make changes in our community to make our communities much better.
Sheriff Dance, you and I talked about, I think, a relationship or partnership that your office has with one of the colleges there.
Yes.
Can you share that information with us as a part of what you are partnering in the community?
Yes, absolutely. So, and what this directly relates to is our detention center. So what I did was I looked at the three main root causes as to why people come into the detention center. And I identified those things as substance use, abuse, mental illness, and poverty, because people don't have jobs and don't have the skills, necessary skills to get those jobs. So I tackled all three of those issues and started some very innovative, progressive programs inside of the detention center. One of those things is partnering with Pitt Community College. So Pitt Community College now comes in and does the assessments on inmates who either desire a GED or desire to be connected to vocational skills, and they would make that connection outside of the detention center. And so to date, and it's been very successful, coming in and doing those assessments. I've had several of the inmates actually obtain their GED. while they were in the detention center and is now gainfully employed because most employers at least require a minimum of a GED. So that has been a great, great partnership, utilizing resources within this community. My grants writer actually comes from West Virginia, and we know West Virginia is really ate up with drugs and meth and those kinds of things. But she said to me, Pitt County has more resources within this county than the entire state of West Virginia. And so, that really said something to me. We're not utilizing these resources, but I've now utilized those resources not only in addressing the issues, again, with poverty, but with substance use abuse and with mental illness. I've embedded now co-responders that are embedded within this office. When we go on mental health calls, we either have mobile crisis to respond, or we utilize the co-responders that's embedded with us. And that co-responder, the difference is that the mobile crisis worker who professionally handles the issues of mental health doesn't do the follow-up. The co-responders who are embedded with us are the ones who will go back and do the follow-up. Did you go to your doctor's appointment? Are you taking your medicine? Connecting them with the other mental health resources within the county. And so we don't have to keep going back and forth to the same house. Many times when they call, we already know that through historical information in the CAD that this is going to be a mental health call here. And so we go ahead and get that mobile crisis person en route, or either get the co-responder, prepared to go out. Those are the professionals who should be dealing with mental health issues. Police officers, sheriffs are not trained. I mean, we get a 40-hour CIT training. We are not professionals in dealing with mental health issues. The professionals and the resources that are here needs to be the ones that handle those situations. It keeps us kind of out of having to confront folk that we really don't have a fundamental understanding of how to confront them. We are trained to go in and to stop whatever's happening. And then we're off to the next call. We don't go back and do that follow-up. We don't go back and say, hey, are you taking your medicines? Did you go see your psych doctor? We don't have the luxury of doing that. Mental health was dumped in the laps of law enforcement when many of the mental health entities went away. And so when you don't have anybody else to call and you've got something going on, who you gonna call? You're gonna call the police for everything. And that's how mental health got dumped into our laps. It's not like we were jumping. I know I wasn't jumping up and down saying, hey, we wanna tackle mental health issues. No, we don't want to do that. But when after 5 o'clock, when the doctor's office is closed or the therapist's office is closed, who do they call? They call law enforcement. And so now here in Pitt County, I'm pushing it back into the laps of those who are equipped professionally to handle those things. And I just think it's where it should be. For instance, sometimes you'll have, and not just mental health. I mean, you'll have issues of, and I'm sure the other sheriffs can attest to this. We get calls because mom calls and says, my kid won't get up out of bed and go to school today. Well, that's not a law enforcement issue. It should be it really should be a DSS issue, if you ask me, because there's apparently a problem with that parent's parenting skills. Because I know my mama wouldn't, she would have handled it. And so, yeah, there's many resources and entities within our communities that should be handling some of these things that's going on nationally across the nation, not just in North Carolina. That officers shouldn't be postured in that position in those situations in the first place.
Mr. Eden, let me add to that what Sheriff Dance was saying also about the crisis intervention team. As we're dealing with those individuals that we feel that need that mental health, the families also can make that phone call. Every magistrate in the state of North Carolina possesses that 800 number that will notify that intervention team that an individual is in crisis. So it doesn't always require them to go to the master's office to do an involuntary commitment order, because here's what happens. When you call in the intervention team, they can come to the individual and help with that assessment and get them where they need to be a whole lot quicker than we do. Once we get an IVC from the magistrate, the intervention team is cut out of the process. What happens then is they become in our custody. We have to take them to a local hospital to get their medical treatment done first to make sure medically that they're okay before they get the psychological side of it. Now, with the intervention team, they don't have to go through the medical piece. They go straight to the psychological piece, getting them the help that needs to be done. So as Sheriff Dan says, as law enforcement has been thrusted in that role of being the person that everybody's calling for the mental health piece, the families now can have that same information. They can call without even having law enforcement involved and have that intervention team in. Now, if there are reports of any issues of violence or the area is unsafe, that's when law enforcement will come in, like Sheriff Dan says, to make sure that everything's orderly, to make sure everything's safe, so that these professionals can come in and do their job. And then we assist and stand back to allow them to do their job. But our number one goal should be to make sure that the area is safe for these professionals to be able to conduct their business based upon the training and expertise that they have, rather than relying on law enforcement to get there first to do that piece, which we are not trained to do.
And can I say one other thing too? One of the other things here, because we all know that mentally ill people do not belong in the jail. That is not the place for them. It's the worst place. It makes it worse when they're in the jail. So in my detention center, I actually have a jail navigator whose responsibility it is to find those outside resources and connect that person who's in there with that resource, so that when the door opens, that resource is there to pull them the rest of the way and deal with their mental health issues. And but I did just want to add that piece that's one of the ways that I addressed mental illness inside of the detention center, to encompass those in the detention center anyway, because really, if you think about it, most of the time, not all of them, because some people just mean, but most of the time, the issues are, someone has a mental health illness, and when you think of substance use abuse, that is a co-occurring mental health issue. And so those are the biggest things I know here in Pitt County. I have 2 or 3 drug overdoses every day, and having to deal with those issues and just creating avenues for these people to get the resources that they need, so that we don't have to continue to deal with those issues that we are not professionally equipped to deal with in the first place.
I have to add this for when we start talking about substance abuse. So us here in Buncombe County, we have a lot of the same programs that Sheriff Dancy spoke about. But in addition to that, we're now into what we call medical assisted treatment. And we call it the MAT program. And I don't know if they have it in theirs, detention centers, but this is also an outreach to the community where I call them, we hand carry or hand deliver people who are not only mental health, but substance abuse to providers in the community. So they're able to get help, prior to them getting out of detention center, because true enough that we did our numbers and our research, and then we was up to like 57% of our overdoses had been in Buncombe County Detention Facility. And so that was just really too high for me as a sheriff to sit by and do nothing. And so that's why we started trying to do the MAT program. Currently, we're doing the MAT program. And so again, I have to get the numbers back. We're sure that the numbers have reduced about how many people have overdosed in our community.
Sheriff, thank you so very much for all of that timely information. And we're going to go to our last series of questions. And as you can imagine, excessive force has been a real serious issue in this entire country. It's finally something that I think the greater community is finally acknowledging that does happen. And we would just ask to, there's so many different permutations on questions we can ask around that topic, but we would just ask for you all to each give us your thoughts on how that issue what can you as sheriffs do, suggestions you have for training, for lack of a better word, what resources can community members use when that issue may arise?
I would say that the educational piece is not necessarily training. The officers are well trained, not only in North Carolina, but in our nation. It's not about the training, it's about the decision is made when that decision needs to be made. Also, too, the reason why it's so important to educate the community is we have to understand that on the side of the road, at a traffic stop, is not the time to do your case. That's just not the time. The time at that moment is to follow the instructions that are lawfully given. Listen to the key words, the instructions that are lawfully given. And then if you have a complaint, and what I tell people in my county is, as the sheriff of Richmond County and governing this office, I cannot make any changes, corrections, or alterations if the public is not taking participation in reporting those complaints. You will always hear about the 15 or 20 minutes of fame after an incident has happened, saying that, oh, this happened to me, that happened to me, but it wasn't important enough to report it then. And that's what we're trying to change, that culture. We're trying to change that attitude to let people know your complaint does make a difference. Your complaint is tracking that officer everywhere he or she goes. Every time you file a complaint, it is investigated, it's looked into, and decisions are being made. But as it pertains to the use of force, anytime an officer puts hands on, that is a use of force. Anytime an officer draws his or her firearm, that is a use of force. These things have to be reported. They have to be reported and investigated. Now, in the realm of our duty, when it comes to excessive use of force, I don't have an internal affairs division that will investigate my own staff. And I'll tell you why. It would be possible for me to talk about transparency and trust if every time something happens in my agency that I'm investigating it. Here's what the community would say. Well, we told you he wasn't going to do anything. Those are his guys. So at our disposal, we have the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation, who is not tied to any of us, who does not work for any of us. And when we communicate with the district attorney to say that we have an officer that needs to be investigated based upon an incident, or we have a complaint in the community that requires an investigation, we call that in for that particular transparency to get that done, so that no one can say, well, Sheriff Clemens, he's just going to brush it up under the rug, or he's not going to do anything about it, or he's going to give us some lame excuse about what happened. No, I believe in transparency. I believe in the truth, no matter who it helps or who it hurts. So as it pertains to the use of force in my agency, I track those use of forces. I track when those officers pull their firearms. I track when those persons put hands on, and anything that comes into my facility, whether it's the city police, highway patrol, or the sheriff's office, if there's a complaint about somebody being beat up and this, that, and other, we investigated to verify, did it happen? Did it not happen? And let's take the appropriate action of what's going on. We realize in this realm today that these decisions of using deadly force has been happening more than ever before. But let's understand why it's really happening. Let's understand why the information has come out. The information today is coming out because of technology. Use of force has always been an incident that has happened in law enforcement, but the day and age that we live in today, you have videos that are witnessing it. You have folks that are coming forward now. We have technology that's making sure these things are done. We have body-worn cameras, we have car cams. All this stuff is being captured now, that in the past, it was just your word against my word against your word. But the day and age now, we have technology that can assist us more so than ever before in making sure that we're put into a position. And as Sheriff Miller said, We are the ones to be held accountable. But also too, our communities share the same responsibility, and we have to educate and teach and train all of us to make sure there's a time and place to handle your business, but on the side of the road is not the time, that's not the place. You have an opportunity because every last one of us law enforcement officers have something on our chest, which is called our name badge. And you can identify us by coming to the office and saying, I had a negative encounter with Sheriff Clemens, yada, 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 or Deputy so-and-so and so-and-so. These are the things that need to be done. And we as sheriffs, we as chiefs of police cannot change our agencies. We cannot change our cultures unless the community is participating and taking ownership into their sheriff's offices and their police officers too. They pay good tax dollars, and those tax dollars should pay for, educate, and train the best law enforcement officers that money can pay for.
Thank you, Sheriff Clemens. Sheriff Dance.
So for me, policies and best practices are key when it comes to excessive force. And those policies should include things like duty to intervene when an officer sees another officer using excessive force, the duty to report those incidents when they see another officer using excessive force. Policies on body cameras. My agency had never had body cameras prior to me coming in. I came in and was able to convince the county commissioners we need these body cameras. It's a way to show the community that we don't have anything to hide, and we shouldn't want to have anything to hide. We should want our community to have the ability to be able to look at what it is we're doing and why we do what we do. And policies that even talks about there is no excuse that a body camera should never be on. There are some actions that will be taken if you're an officer and you're on the scene and I don't want to hear I forgot to turn that body camera on. There's a policy that addresses that. And so, I mean, it's about if you have the correct policies in place, you, of course, never putting a knee on a person's neck. Of course, that is one of the, I hate to have to spell it out, but in my policy, that is not an acceptable use of restraint or anything like that. Never put the knee on the neck. So these are things that we have to put in the policies. And I tell my officers, as long as you go by what's in those policies that I've given you, then you ought to be fine, because that means you haven't done anything to violate those things. And simply in any agency, if those policies and if the officers simply follow the policies and the best practices, we probably would not be where we're at today in the use of excessive force. And certainly, as Sheriff Clemens has said, the sheriff has the ability to hire and fire without having to go through hoops, and we have a responsibility and to look at those officers who come before us with these issues. I even have a system in place that one of my majors is in one of his jobs is to anytime when it gets to the third incident of where somebody has made a complaint.
That's right.
They're coming and they're going to have that supervisor's going to have a talk with them.
That's right.
When it gets to a certain number of another complaint, and I'm not talking about very egregious complaints, I'm talking about the little things, the little flags that we should be seeing before it gets to that point where they're involved in a situation that could be could be deadly. And so there's always these little flags. And so we want to prevent that. We want to notice that, see that, and we want to put them on notice. I want them on notice after that third complaint. After, and then, secondarily, it goes up the line If it gets to like the fifth, sixth complaint, then they're gonna go before that captain. And eventually it's gonna get to me when it goes up through the rank structure, if it gets that far. But we do want to put them on notice. And so anyway, that's my little spiel on excessive force.
Ms.
Yeah.
Goins, before you get to Sheriff Miller, can I throw this in right quick and based
Sure.
upon what Sheriff Dan said? The one thing I can speak on our sheriffs and especially the ones that's on here, we lead by example. And therefore, see, what she was talking about was the piece in how you change that culture by making sure that she has her thumb on the pulse of her agency. She knows what they're doing, when they're doing it, how they're doing it. So that's why she's in the position to understand what is going on with these changes and what's going on with these 3-time rules with our officers who have these minimal complaints that lead up to the big ones. See, that's one thing we're not going to do. We don't want to have a list of, well, they had 18 complaints against them and nothing was done. No, after that third complaint, we're making decisions. We're either they're going to be with us or they're not going to be with us. The other thing is all of us have our policies that we follow to the T. Chokeholds, no chokeholds, no knees on the back, no things of that nature. Our attitude is this: once you are in custody, you are under control and you are helpless in that manner. Our job at that point is to take you before a judicial official without unnecessary delay to get the charges based upon you, take you into our facility and do what needs to be done. So I tip my hat to all these sheriffs in our association because that's what we talk about. That's what we deal with. But with us on this panel today, because I have a personal contact with them, I can tell you, we're about changing our cultures. We're about standing up for our communities, and we are about doing what is right. We are held accountable.
Thank you, Sheriff Clemens. And Sheriff Miller, yours will have to be the last word because we're almost at the end of our time. And this has been a phenomenal panel. And we can tell you later just all of the accolades you're getting in the comments. So
Yeah.
Sheriff Miller.
Sheriff Miller, if you will include, we had a question along the lines of excessive force, but it was related to continual force. Can you actually include some of the information on that in your response?
So let me do 2 things. First, I want to say to you, for me, it's about 0% of tolerance, 0, right? And I would also second what Sheriff Dance had said about duty to intervene. And also, I just want to, I really close with this. Upon taking office, I brought this saying to my office. It's about what do you know, when did you know it, and what did you do? So what that means is we are placed in a lot of different, situations, and sometimes maybe we're not properly equipped to be there or even handle them. I look at that differently when I know we have trained you to do something different and you end up doing something different than what we've trained you to do. So when that happens, I fall back to 0 tolerance, okay? Because being held accountable is what our community is asking for. And again, I think our community should hold us accountable. And that's why I'm into, I have an advisory board, but I'm into us having oversight committee. Some fight me on this, right? So I'm just putting that out there that I'm all about it because I've learned that law enforcement, we need a different lens and look at how we police and how we do our job. And the reason we need a different lens is because we get caught up in the way we've always done things. And no matter how much training, we still have people out there training to do bad things and wrong things, right? And so we need a different lens because we start justifying our actions. And just Quentin saying this, if this wasn't caught on tape, are we really sitting here having this conversation? My answer is no. And I'm old enough to tell you about Rodney King. We seen that some of us was old enough to see Rodney King and we said that would never happen again. Now we're saying George Floyd. And I'm telling us in the state of North Carolina and the nation, if we don't do nothing, there's gonna be another George Floyd, right? We said it wouldn't be another Rodney King, but that's not true, folks, right? And we're here. And so what was the other thing, rather? I'm sorry, that this thing here is really dear, near and personal to me. One is being African-American and being, I wasn't raised in a terrible neighborhood, so please don't take that away. but I did grow up being African-American. I did come through law enforcement as African-American. And I don't want to get into this thing about how I was treated and all that. I'm just saying right now, we're in a position as sheriffs to do something different in our counties. And I'm asking each and every sheriff to do something different. Let's not go back to the way we've always done business, because at the end of the day, folks, it's wrong. And for us who want to sit here and condone and find excuses about what we've seen on TV, I'm sorry, I'm not with you. Right? And so that's, all right, I'm done.
And if I could say one last thing,
Go ahead, Fred.
Mr. Eaton, do what the officer tells you. It's the sheriff's what?
Office.
Thank you. Good.
Hey, Sheriff Dance, I got him covered. I'll put up his first dollar. I got
All
him
right,
covered.
all
I'll
right.
take care of it.
Hey, Sheriff, I counted 4 times already. But I think the other thing was he was saying about continuance or something.
There was a
Continuum.
question that somebody talked about continuum of force, but I think you probably, you closed it out very powerful and strong.
Okay.
So
I'll
Thank
just leave it. I'll just leave that there, but I'll just tell you that we have to look at that also as the continuum of force. I think that needs to be looked at and reviewed. And again, I just want to stress to our community that now's the time for us to do this together. Our community, we need you. Law enforcement is asking for help. And if they not, I'm asking for them today that we need help, and because we want to do the right thing. And if we could have done it by ourselves, we would have already done it. And we haven't. And so this is why I'm telling you, we need our community, we need help. And I just tell you, these couple of sheriffs on here today, we're willing to listen, but we got to have people come and have safe, I call it safe conversations, real conversations. You have to tell us how you really feel, and we have to be responsive to that. So I thank you. I know time is short, but again, thank you for having me. But that excessive force thing is real passionate to me, and I'm sorry.
Well, we just want to say to the panelists, thank you. This has been phenomenal. And again, you all, I don't know if y'all have been looking at the chats, but you're getting accolades from all across the state. I wish we had sheriffs like you all in all 100 counties, but thank you for your commitment, your lifelong commitment to public service to the betterment of North Carolina. And so we're going to wrap up this session. Again, thank you to our panelists. You have been outstanding. The links to the other sessions for this afternoon are in the chat. The survey is in the chat, and then we will have a wrap up, a brief wrap up at the end of the next 2 sessions. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Everyone have a great rest of the day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
thank you all.
Bye-bye.